Hello my good people, today we're going to look at Cartoon Network. The channel that had tons of memorable and nostalgia series that are still entertaining whether you're a kid or an adult. Well, the channel is pretty much being kept on life support and basically isn't the same as it used to be. Cartoon Network was a staple of mine and a lot of other people's childhoods, and more than deserving of a top 10 list. I'll say this though, much like my Nickelodeon Top 10 series I did a while back, I'll probably be focusing on some of their less recent shows, since I stopped watching Cartoon Network around 2016 or so, outside of the occasional rerun of the show I would watch before then. Also, there's two TV series that I would love to include on the list, but I'm not sure if they can fully classify anymore. One is Samurai Jack. Amazing series, would definitely be on the list, probably top 5, but the final season went to Toonami and it isn't even marked as a Cartoon Network series on streaming services anymore. And another is Ben 10. Don't get me wrong, the original series was great, however the sequel series aren't really that good, and not to mention Cartoon Network seems to class the sequel series and the original as like a whole show. Also, much like my Nickelodeon Top 10 list, it has to be shows that were made in-house, like not stuff that they just happen to air like an old Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Anyways, let's begin! Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, for a series about where imaginary friends go when kids outgrow them. This is one to remember. Basically, the series follows a kid named Tabak who visits his imaginary friend every day so he doesn't go up for sale after his mom thought he was too old to have one. The show was funny, creative, and has an interesting premise which it took full advantage of. Plenty of stories that would only work in this setting, such as what happens when babies make imaginary friends, what if an imaginary friend tries to find their kid from years ago, and even what happens when edgy kids try to make an imaginary friend. We had a fun cast of both literally and figuratively colorful characters, from the mischievous and egotistical Blue, to the big but soft Eldorado, to the chaotic one-word speaking Coco, and the almost too nice Wilt. And how the show not only balanced them out so we'd have each character have at least one episode to themselves, but how they'd work off each other. I will say this though, despite the cute look of the series, the plots and humor can be surprisingly cynical at times. Well yeah, the show most of the time doesn't go too far with its mean-spirited tone. Most of the time, I said. The show has more sitcom-esque people at each other's throat type comedy than you'd expect from such a wholesome premise. Of course, the show does have its heartwarming moments, as well as just feel-good episodes. Overall, a great time, even if the universe is pretty disturbing if you think about it. I mean, it's been confirmed that teenagers can make imaginary friends. You know, hormonal teenagers who are going through puberty. Also the fact that children have the ability to create unholy abominations just by thinking about them. It's best not to overthink it. The Amazing World of Gumball. What happens when a bunch of animated characters live in a live-action background? Well, you get this wonderfully odd series. Following Gumball the cat and his adopted fish brother with legs, this show was a mix of Looney Tunes-esque slapstick and kidcom tropes. The animation is truly unique, with not only the characters being animated in different art styles from one another. Heck, certain characters incorporate puppets, they even incorporate some live-action actors, albeit in very odd ways. But almost anything in the show can be anthropomorphized, not just the animals and plants, but also the food, paper, a robot, video game pixels, and even a freaking thumbprint. There's just no limit to what they can turn into a character. The show would often creatively tell typical sitcom stories, while adding that surreal nature to it and fantasy element. The Amazing World of Gumball took more risks than you'd expect from an episodic series like this, such as permanent changes and a relationship upgrade to a character, and having the characters become more layered, both figuratively and metaphorically. While the show wasn't as popular as the other two big names of CN at the time, I'm glad people now realize what a good show this was, and is fondly remembered for its lovable characters, bizarre humor, creativity, and overall good time. The Powerpuff Girls. Don't let the title fool you, this show was pretty badass. Following 3 little girls who were created in a lab, and then promised to fight to keep the city of Townsville safe before bedtime. The series was an action comedy that was full of memorable monsters and villains, with episodes ranging from hilarious to exciting and heartfelt, and even just downright bizarre. The show usually had that fast-paced energy to it, which meant we were getting rapid-fire jokes and storylines that would never drag. There was also that perfect blend where the series looked and felt cute enough that it was marketable to young children, but it also had enough action and darker, creepier bad guys in episodes, so that older viewers wouldn't be too bored by it, making it feel like a blend of a superhero action series and a sitcom cartoon kids show. And somehow it doesn't feel mishmashed or tonally off at all. The villains of the show were also a big highlight. After all, you can't have a good series like this without some good antagonists, and they do not disappoint. Mojo, Jojo, him, the Green Gang, and more all had their moments to shine and stand out. Usually episodes giving them more focus were the best ones. The show had a ton of fun characters. Heck, even the narrator was a memorable character in a way, since his commentary added to the humor of the events. Also, yeah, I like the contrast of cute-looking characters beating the crap out of giant monsters in surprisingly violent for a kid show kind of ways. The Powerpuff Girls was the best show that a lot of us were too embarrassed to admit we liked. But let's just admit it now, it was a good show, and nothing can take that away, although the failed reboots years later definitely tried. Dexter's Lab. Before there was Jimmy Neutron, there was Dexter. The series follows a boy genius and his misadventures trying to survive school grades while balancing his love of science at home. This was one of the first CN shows, and it still holds up very well after all these years. What I like about this series is how the laboratory setting and inventions leads to a ton of interesting ideas and stories, as well as some very funny humor. From being turned to gum, to trying to be handsome, and lots of robots, there's so much you can do with this premise. The series had that old school feel to it, even back when it was new, taking influence from classic cartoons, but it also felt crazier, more unhinged, and slightly edgier than something like a 60s Hanna-Barbera show. The characters are also a big highlight as well, of course, with Dexter himself being a funny and sort of realistic character with how his high IQ often makes him a bit of an outcast, and letting his love of science get the best of him. His sister Dee Dee being the exact opposite in IQ, but a fun foil nonetheless. Mandark being a funny rival for Dexter, and having a surprisingly sympathetic backstory. He's also a pretty good boy genius in his own right. And I'm just scraping the surface. There's plenty of lovable and memorable characters to discuss, but we don't have all day. While mostly focusing on humor, the series did occasionally have its action sequences, and while they're not amazing, they're fun and entertaining in their own way. Overall, Dexter's Lab was pure genius. Codename Kids Next Door. Did you ever, or currently if you're still a kid, feel like certain things adults enforce get in the way of you truly enjoying your childhood? Well, these guys got your back. The show follows a group of secret agent children who battle the evil of adult tyranny such as Homeworker Broccoli using 2x4 technology, which actually adds a bit of extra these were made by kids style to the weaponry and gadgets, as well as the whole treehouse base, even if they obviously have technology that even real people don't have, as well as having a base on the moon. Yeah, I don't know anybody in real life who could make stuff like this, kid or adult. The characters are all great. Each of the numbered 5 operatives had that personality that are strong on their own, but when working together, they make for not only some great humor and character interactions. As for the villains, they're also great, not just because a lot of them are based off stuff kids typically don't like, such as getting the common cold, having your candy stolen, and, getting spanked. Yeah, one of the villains, Count Spanky-Lot, was a vampire who went around spanking naughty children. I don't know if this would fly in a kid show today. But they're pretty funny and sometimes threatening bad guys that have their own level of depth with their backstories and personalities. And they work well off each other. Also, don't worry, not every adult was treated as a villain in the show, like the kids' parents, for example. And there were some villainous children, like the delightful kids from down the lane. With its movie parodies, quirky and unique stories, memorable characters and art style and overall premise, there was a good reason for us to be signing in. Adventure Time. Arguably the most influential 2010s cartoon and the biggest hit from CN at the time, Adventure Time was truly a show that felt larger than life, with its creative world building, its tons of lovable and memorable characters, and just sheer amount of stuff that makes you question what the heck is going on. What's great about Adventure Time is that despite the many different elements of the world, from the fantasy to the science fiction, from the dark to the colorful and bright, none of these elements really felt out of place for the world of Ooh, which isn't something you can say about a lot of shows, but the world here was just so diverse that almost anything can go. Also, the plot lines of the episodes were varied as well, having both comedy-heavy plots and more, well, adventure-themed ones. You never know what you were going to get in this show. Despite the surreal nature of the show, once you watched enough of it, you started to understand how this world works. But of course, what truly makes the show are the characters. With Finn and Jake as the main brotherly duo, Princess Bubblegum, who's a genius and ruler of the Candy Kingdom, who's shown to have a darker side later, and the Ice King, who starts off as a typical pathetic villain, but all that changes when we find out his backstory, and all of a sudden you start feeling for him and realizing how complex he truly was. Also, we're introduced to the true villain of the show later, the Lich. Heck, even a lot of the one-off characters are almost as memorable and well-written as the main ones. Adventure Time, while not a perfect tonal balance, was able to get surprisingly deep and have great character growth, proving to be able to handle themes that we initially didn't think would happen in a show as colorful and cute-looking as this one, but still having plenty of funny episodes, of course. Overall, this cartoon was truly an adventure to follow. Ed, Edd, and Eddy. How? How does a cartoon with such a simple setting and squiggly animation work so well? Somehow, this show is comedy gold. Set in a suburban neighborhood, focused on 3 kids with similar names. The 3 of them usually try to scam neighbors in the cul-de-sac for their money to buy jawbreakers, though not every episode was about money or buying jawbreakers. The episodes, while having a grounded storyline, most of the time, would have that zany cartoon slapstick humor that had us howling. Despite the strange nature of the show, it was actually a somewhat realistic depiction of childhood to an extent, since it did accurately represent living in a neighborhood, making it both relatable and hilarious. The way the series was able to have a ton of episodes that usually felt very different from one another, while only staying in 2 locations, the neighborhood and the school, and having a pretty small cast overall, was really a testament to how well the show was made. The characters are also a highlight, despite there being only 12 to name characters, not counting Plank, Rolf's farm animals, and Eddie's big brother at the end. Yeah, outside of these characters, everybody else was either part of a faceless mass or just some arms coming from off-screen. They really knew how to make them shine with their personalities that really worked well off each other, and the main 3 were perfect foils to one another. Eddie being the scammer and the rougher one, Double D being the sort of straight man / voice of reason to an extent, and Ed being the lovable, simple-minded moron. The show definitely put more focus on being funny than any major storytelling, but I gotta say, we got some good character moments here and there, and the final episode, The Big Picture Show, was probably one of the best ways you could end a cartoon series, as the big mystery is finally revealed at the end and the story wraps up nicely for the characters. Overall, Ed, Edd, and Eddy was a charming show that was physical slapstick comedy and pure goofiness, and you better believe I was Edgar to check it out. I tried with the pun. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Back in the 2000s, somebody at Cartoon Network thought it would be a good idea to have Death himself as one of the main protagonists in a kid's show. And you know what? They were right! The show focused on 2 kids who now own the Reaper after winning a limbo competition in order to save their pet hamster. The series was truly something else with its wacky and often dark humor, having episodes where Wishing Skull screws with people's wishes, ending an episode with everybody aging backwards, or Santa Claus being a vampire who needs to be cured are just some examples. But they balance it out with being just so goofy, it's sort of like a lighthearted dark show, if that makes sense. While the series was pretty out there with its concepts, ranging from kooky to spooky, the main setting being a typical American suburban neighborhood means that all the chaos and creatures made it all the more enjoyable, feeling like a mix between a cartoon sitcom and a horror comedy. The show had a bit of a gothic feel, at least in earlier episodes, but also felt very Saturday morning at the same time. Sort of like if Tim Burton and Chuck Jones were to work on something together. As the show went on, it became more wacky than dark, but throughout most of its run it remained an entertaining series nonetheless. The humor was usually hilarious with its variety of slapstick humor, randomness, and its many movie references. The characters were all memorable, from Jeff the Spider who demands Billy view him as a son, Hoss Delgado, who's basically this universe's equivalent of Ash Williams from The Evil Dead, and Aaron who has a one-sided crush on the wrong person. However, of course, the 3 main characters are what truly make the show work. Billy being the kid who's foolish enough not to know shampoo from dog poo, but sort of acts like the heart of the group, Grim who's actually surprisingly the word of reason to an extent, and even kind of a wimp, and Mandy who's grumpy and cold and even kind of evil. Yes, the Grim Reaper isn't the evil one of the group, and their differences is what makes them work so well together. Overall, this cartoon will probably put you in a good mood, despite being grim. Courage the Cowardly Dog, the cartoon that terrified yet intrigued an entire generation. Courage was a show about a little pink dog who was scared of things very easily, living with an elderly couple who owns him, one being a sweet old woman who loves him, and the other being an angry old man who doesn't, and the many horrifying creatures he has to save them from, or mostly Muriel. Ironically, the show was more creepy and horror-themed than the one with the Grim Reaper, what with all its generally freaky monsters and horror tropes, such as possession and creepy hotels run by evil creatures, or straight-up serial killers, in a way. It's almost like a more cartoonish Twilight Zone. The episodes can range from thrilling, humorous, and even sad, which makes Courage feel like a series that has more depth than you'd expect from a goofy cartoon starring a pink dog. Yeah, it's a horror series, for kids at least, but it has some heart, which is sort of rare these days. The characters, while there isn't a lot of recurring ones, they're all memorable, including the villains and antagonists, even if they're one-off, and Courage is a lovable, scaredy dog who ends up saving the day, despite being scared of his own shadow. While the show was scary, for kids at least, it was fun enough that you wanted to come back for more, and it had that weird offbeat vibe despite airing on a major network. Courage the Cowardly Dog. I recommend you get the courage to check it out. Before we get to one, let's go through a few honorable mentions. Besides the ones I mentioned at the beginning, my honorable mentions are Camp Lazlo, Chowder, The Misadventures of Flapjack, Johnny Bravo, We Bare Bears, and Steven Universe. All great shows, but I don't know if they can make the top 10. Granted, it was really hard for me to decide what order to put these shows in, but for now, I think I'm good. Anyways, on to number 1. Regular Show. You know who else likes the Regular Show? My mom! The series followed the adventures of a raccoon and a blue jay who worked on a park for a talking gumball machine. Usually episodes start off relatively down to earth, with plots about getting jinxed, getting sidetracked from work, or even just making hot dogs. But as the episodes go along, they get crazier and crazier, often ending in some big climax where monsters are time traveling through dimensions or something like that. And this is a genius formula, since you wonder how simply beating a video game or helping your passed out boss is going to lead to some crazy adventure, and it doesn't even get there just randomly. Usually there's build up so it doesn't even come out of nowhere. The characters are all great. Mordecai and Rigby as the main duo that have that 20-something bestie energy that's fun to watch, Benson being one of those characters you relate to more the older you get, Skips as the tough, cool old guy, and Muscleman as that jerky, annoying, but hilarious character. And Pops is the lovable, childlike guy who's more important than we initially think. I like how the main characters are either animals or objects, while most of the background ones are normal humans. It's a weird but cool aesthetic. Also, this show was edgy for a Cartoon Network series. Much like Adventure Time, it had innuendos, crude humor, and bloodless carnage that almost made it feel like an Adult Swim show, but was still tame enough that it could air on a children's network. Kids would enjoy it for all its wacky comedy, while adults would enjoy the 80s references and sort of relatable themes and storylines, since it focused on more adult characters trying to live life. Also, who doesn't enjoy the montages set to actually licensed songs? Well, the final season in space kinda left a bit to be desired, and I'm not a big fan of the relationship drama episodes. Regular Show still remains a jolly good show, and it's anything but regular. And that was my top 10 Cartoon Network shows. What did you think? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.